Well, thank you for staying with us. In a bid to make for the speedy dispensation of justice in tax matters in the country, the Chief Judge of the Federal High Court recently issued the Federal High Court's Federal Inland Revenue Service Practice Directions 2021. The directions in respect to tax matters and application filed by the Federal Inland Revenue Service. The direction also seeks to ensure effective management of tax cases and expeditious determination of tax-related matters, provide directions on applications from the FIRS, and promote the use of electronic filing and service systems in tax-related matters. Although the overall objective of the directions is to make for speedy dispensation of justice in tax and tax-related matters is commendable, analysts are of the view that the directions is fraught with provisions that are at variance with the extant tax laws, particularly the FIRS Establishment Act and the Companies Income Tax Act. Well, to give more insights to this, I introduced him earlier. He is a partner, Tax Advisory and Regulatory Services at Anderson, Nigeria, Mr. Michael Ango. Mr. Ango, good afternoon. It's good to see you.
Afternoon. How are you doing?
Fine. It's been a while. Let's start with the latest move by the Federal High Court that's releasing this FIRS practice direction on expeditious disposal of tax matters. Now, the aim is clear: effective case management and, of course, expeditious disposal of tax-related matters. Now, your thoughts on how this would help, redefine tax administration in the country, if we put it that way?
Okay, yeah, so you are aware, of course, that in the last few years, there's been significant focus on tax revenue as a means of shoring up. But from the perspective of the FIRS, one of the challenges that they've had is that tax cases take a long time to resolve. And from the perspective of the FIRS, the time value of money. So if you have someone owing you some particular, you want to recover it as soon as possible. And so in the view of the FIRS, move to see how they can quickly close out tax disputes. The appeal process, and even if you go to litigation, I believe that this practice direction will help to kind of close out tax disputes within the shortest possible. In terms of the practice directions itself, it was issued, of course, the Federal High Court procedural rules, which empowers the Chief Justice of the Chief Judge of the Federal High Court to practice directions. But like you rightly said, there are serious practice directions, and if you may, I can point out a few. I think the most important issue is that practice directions, generally speaking, are not themselves, in the sense that they are not statutes. They do not create obligations. What they simply do is explain how you can exercise certain rights or gain certain access to courts, and generally be resolved before courts. But here we see in the practice direction provisions that have been clearly introduced, which are not in the substantive tax laws, and are also of the Federal High Court Act, which created the Federal High Court, of course. So, the practice directions provide that if has a tax dispute or has issued an assessment, they can approach the Federal High Court, motion ex parte, which means with taxpayer notice, and get an order of interim forfeiture. Simply means is that if FIRS issues an assessment, they can approach the court to get you to pay over the assessment, or at least forfeit that amount, the federal government, without, of course, putting you on notice, i.e. without giving you the opportunity yourself against such a notice. And if you want to challenge that notice, assuming the notice is given, if you don't want to challenge that order, you must deposit 50% of the asset. Now, the challenge with that simply is that the tax laws, whether you're talking of the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act or the Companies Income Tax Act, do not have any sort for interim forfeiture in our tax laws. Also, the practice does not specify or clarify whether this assessment has to have been final and conclusive assessment, i.e. an assessment that is not being challenged, utilized, i.e. it means that the taxpayer owes that money and he's not disputing it. These are some of the issues that have made people to really concerns about the practice directions. But overall, it's an effort by the Federal Inland Revenue Service to use the instrumentality of law, of course, to start disputes within the shortest possible time.
Now, before I move to my next question with regard to this, would you say that with the figures coming in, or what we've seen maybe for the first quarter, is the FIRS doing really better than what is expected? Talking about trying to increase revenue and all of this means being diverse. Are they working well? Are you seeing the, what would you say, what's your assessment of what's coming in, talking about in figures?
So, we don't, the second quarter results out, but the first quarter results were quite good. I think, if I recall, what FIRS said they collected was about 1.5 trillion or thereabout in the first quarter. I can't remember, but tax collection, I think they have done a lot much better than they did last year and even the year before. Just remember that there was Corona last year, and then of course the drop in oil prices, and then of course the disruptions in the economy, including the test and all of that. So these are issues that significantly affected the Nigerian economy. In terms of what the FIRS has tried to do in the last 3 to 6 months, first 3 to 6 months of the year, is really shore up their collection efforts, enforcement, a significant number of circulars trying to clarify and explain what the tax laws, and of course the Finance Act 2020, its operation, you know, economy. So there's a lot of effort going in. As you're telling, a deadline for companies is 30th of June. So we'll wait to see what comes in by the quarter, which is usually the peak period for companies in tax collection. So we'll have a better picture by the end of June and probably July, and then we can then say, okay, fine, the way the FIRS is going, they may then be able to meet their target of, I think, 7 trillion. But for now, I think we should hold our gunpowder and then decide how well they're doing when the full results are out.
All right, great stuff there. Now, promoting the use of electronic filing and service system, as well as proceeding in tax-related matters, is one of the biggest hurdles we are here to adopt as a nation successfully. Now, let me ask you in clear terms, what would you say this requires from FIRS as well as other revenue-generating agencies?
So, I mean, what, again, Corona, the pandemic brought to the fore was the fact that, you know, our usual way of doing business with physical interactions, delivering assessments or delivering notice letters physically had to change. And in that way, the FIRS Establishment Act was actually amended to allow, you know, FIRS to use technology and all of that in their operations. With particular respect to this practice direction, what it provides for is that you can file your you know, notices of assessment, and then of course court orders and processes electronic. And it goes further to even note that you can serve somebody through the use of WhatsApp. That may seem, you know, there's some problems with technology can be manipulated. So if I send you a WhatsApp message, there is really no means effectively of knowing if so people are able to disable the read. And so I can send you a message and you can say, look, I never received your you know, processes. Secondly, people can clone the phone and say, look, I've served the notice on this company, I've served this, and so, you know, I come to court and I display it. In fact, what the practice direction says that just sufficient evidence that you have served such process. Encourage use of online systems, you know, technology, processes to serve notices and all of that. We have to be sure that we have that is accurate and that cannot be manipulated. We have to assume that there will always be good faith on part of the FIRS or the, of course, again, the part of the taxpayer, you know, and we can't always assume that there will be. In that regard, you know, we have to have foolproof systems. I don't know that there is on this earth that is foolproof, but it is, like I said, a step in the right direction. What we need to do is to continue to fine-tune and to then put together processes that we are sure can help us to move with times as they are. Whether we like it or not, the world is going tech behind.
All right, Mr. Ango, let's take a break and try to reconnect with you, and we'll continue this conversation. Don't go away. It's Your Business Nigeria.
The National Assembly is a busy place. As the bastion of democracy, it is a place where bills are presented, motions debated, laws made, and the yearnings of the people are laid bare. Come with us as we take you through the workings of the National Assembly. We take you through plenary, committee meetings, and probes, all to ensure smooth working of the democratic process.
All right, thank you for staying with us. I still have joining me live via Skype from Abuja, Partner Tax Advisory and Regulatory Services, Anderson, Nigeria, Mr. Michael Ango. Mr. Ango, back to dispute resolution mechanisms, which are taking new forms globally, but still grounded in the principle of amicable resolutions. How do you think this direction on applications by FIRS will help to encourage the settlement of tax debt or liability between parties?
I'm afraid I do not think that this practice will necessarily help to settle disputes amicably. And the reason is simple. Ab initio, the relationship between taxpayers and the balance of power is already with the tax authorities, which, in that regard, it means that the tax authority is the one that issues you an assessment, they're the one audit, they're the one that tell you that this is what you owe, and then you must then begin to object and all of that. Situation where you have the FIRS, being given the opportunity to come to court out notice to the taxpayer and get an interim forfeiture order, and then you are putting a burden on the tax him or her that before you can even appeal against this order, which whether rightly or wrongly, you must deposit 50%. Let me put figures to it. So assuming issues you an assessment of 10 billion naira, which you are disputing, and again, remember I said directions do not clearly state whether these assessments must be inclusive. It then means that once FIRS gets an interim forfeiture order for 10 billion naira and source for 5 billion naira wherever you can find it, and deposit, you can challenge the interim forfeiture order. So I do not think that it will facilitate amicable settlement of dispute. I think needs to be done is I think the practice directions, then the Federal High Court needs to time probably involve stakeholders, because honestly everything is skewed in favor of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. And interestingly, you have provisions for taxpayers approaching the federal, they are dissatisfied or aggrieved with the order. It must always be an approach, and then the taxpayer then has to come as the respondent. The FIRS will always be the applicant, and you and I, a system where such power resides with the government, that taxpayers will then be forced to concede to certain things, whether they are right or not, because people do not to be challenging government. So what I will advise is that the practice that, but more importantly, we already have existing provisions. We have the tax appeal tribunal, which really is the proper for this kind of tax disputes, and the courts have, in the Court of Appeal, several cases have held that the TA forum for resolution of tax disputes. So in a way, commentators actually have is that they're surprised that the FIRS set up and established the TAT, and from what we know, so in terms of training, accommodation, and all, gone outside its own law to then go and, I don't know again, but there's belief that FIRS of the practice directions, so has gone outside its law to then, another forum for tax disputes. I believe that if to actually facilitate amicable settlement of tax disputes, it should go back to the TAT, which is an informal, forum where you don't have to have all of the apparatuses of court and all of that. But I think that these practice directions are skewed in favor of the FIRS, and I do not think that they will necessarily facilitate amicable settlement of cost disputes. I doubt that they will. Rather, what they will do is that they will help the FIRS to be able to enforce payment of tax debts, whether those tax debts are valid or not, because taxpayers may then just want to settle and close out rather than, go and pay 50% of an assessed amount before you can even approach the courts. So taxpayers will then be forced to meet FIRS wherever FIRS decides to meet them.
So at this moment, with all of this policy issues and all of that, what kind of advices will advice will you be giving clients, both local and international, looking at our tax system and all our government is trying to do, maybe to improve our tax to GDP ratio, which is still almost the lowest across the African continent?
Well, the advice has always been voluntary compliance. Taxpayers should at all times understand what their obligations are and try to comply without being forced to do so. At all times, it is always easier and better if you comply upfront. But taxpayers they live within a system, so there might be one or two instances where taxpayers may have issues. Sometimes it may just be an interpretation issue. I have interpreted the law one way, and the tax authority have interpreted it the other way. Of course, at all times, you must consult your advisors. You must have proper advice from your consultants who will tell you this is the right way to go. But also, as a government, the Nigerian government must also be encouraged to create atmosphere for people to be able to bring forward disputes and have those disputes resolved objectively without feeling that, the odds are being stacked against them. We need to improve our tax to GDP ratio, no doubt, but this will not be done by coercing taxpayers. It will be done by building systems, which, in all fairness to the FIRS, they are doing at the moment. They've introduced a fantastic initiative called the Tax Pro Max, which is an end-to-end system for tax filing, assessment, and payments. So initiatives of that nature will help. Also, I'm aware that in the last week or so, the executive chairman of the FIRS has held several stakeholders meetings with different bodies, ICANN, CITN, ANAN, etc. So these are the kind of initiatives that will build taxpayer confidence and also have, tax advisors and tax consultants being able to say to their tax, to taxpayers that, look, the FIRS has an open door policy. It's willing to listen to you. So overall, what I'll say is that we need a multilateral approach, an approach instead of a unilateral approach where, either government or FIRS throws out certain rules or regulations. They need to involve the taxpayers. They need to involve all stakeholders. They need to talk to those of us who are on the field, the tax consultants. They need to talk to the professional bodies. And they even need to talk to industry, manufacturing, petroleum, services, tech and all of that, telecoms, so that they are the ones who are on the field. They know where the shoes pinch and they can better advise the government on how to maximize, revenue collection from these, sectors of the Nigerian economy. We're all Nigerians, we're patriotic, we want the country to do well. If government collects revenue, they will use it to build infrastructure for you and I. So we're here to support government, but government must also help us in a way that we're able to feel that, it is being done, it's a partnership rather than, a big boss and a servant relationship.
It's a good way to live it, Mr. Michael Ango, putting clarity into all of this that has to do with tax matters, partner tax advisory and regulatory services, Anderson, Nigeria. Thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us, and do enjoy your weekend.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right there.